Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? When I told you guys a long time ago, probably almost 2 years ago, that I was predicting Errol Spence would become, if not the most avoided, one of the most avoided fighters in boxing. When I said that, I didn't realize that shit was going to get this damn ridiculous. I mean, it's really getting crazy right now for Errol Spence. Let me go ahead and sum all this up and report the recent news. So, as you guys know, I've been telling you guys for the last week or so, interviewing Errol Spence and reporting the news that Errol Spence, he was supposed to fight against Konstantin Ponomarev in a title eliminator bout. And the winner of that fight would get Kell Brook. Now Kell Brook is fighting against Jesse Vargas. The winner obviously would get the winner of that fight. So I've been telling you guys that for quite some time because that was the news that was reported, right? First, there was the talks that after Errol Spence beats Chris Algieri, he may get the title shot, but it was nothing guaranteed. So now they throw another title eliminator bout in Errol Spence's face, and it's Konstantin. And I told you guys that's a great fight. Konstantin is an undefeated fighter. He just beat the previously undefeated Brad Solomon, right? So now you have two undefeated fighters going against each other to be the mandatory for Kell Brook's title. For those of you guys who don't know anything about Konstantin, he is a very strong power puncher. He's an aggressive type of fighter, which once again would make for a great fight against Errol Spence. Now, when Konstantin's own trainer, Abel Sanchez, actually told me that that would be a very difficult fight for Konstantin to win. When he told me that, that pretty much let me know that even his own trainer deep down doesn't believe that Konstantin can beat someone like Errol Spence. And I guess Konstantin, he agrees with Abel Sanchez because it was just reported today that Konstantin basically pulled out of negotiations for a fight with Errol Spence to once again become the mandatory for Kell Brook's belt. Now, this part of the news is what really raised my eyebrows. So you have Konstantin Ponomarev who pulled out, which is not a huge surprise. But then it was just reported that other fighters were offered this title eliminator bout against Errol Spence. And the names on that list, it kind of raised my eyebrows a little bit. So according to the IBF, Lamont Peterson and Sammy Vasquez, they both turned down an opportunity to fight in a title eliminator bout and have a shot at the title in their very next fight. Now, I'm not going to say it's shocking because realistically, if you know how good Errol Spence is and you know what your chances are deep down of beating him, then you can't really blame them a whole lot. But just knowing the respect that all of these fighters have for Errol Spence in the division is impressive. It's really interesting. It's impressive and it's really interesting. I mean, no matter what you say, regardless if you agree or you disagree with the fighters that Errol Spence called out and they turned down a fight, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is when you look at the list of fighters that basically turned down an Errol Spence fight, I haven't seen a fighter elicit this much respect from his competition probably since Guillermo Rigondeaux, which actually wasn't that long ago. But it's just funny to me how fans try to suggest that a fighter like Gennady Golovkin is one of the most avoided. No. It's a difference from having a couple of opponents that don't want to fight you versus no one wants to fight you. Okay? It's a complete different situation. With Gennady Golovkin, you got about 5 or 6 fighters. Matter of fact, there's a new fighter almost every week now calling out Gennady Golovkin. When it comes to Errol Spence, nobody wants to fight this man. Nobody wants to fight this man. And realistically, they are praising him more than any other fighter in the sport right now. That's what it suggests. I mean, Lamont Peterson, they basically offered Lamont Peterson a shot at the title assuming he gets past Errol Spence. And he turned it down. And then you have Sammy Vasquez, who is a really good prospect. I mean, Sammy Vasquez, if you really think about it, he basically complements Errol Spence. They're pretty much on the same level. The battle of the young undefeateds, they're both prospects. That would have been a great eliminator, a great title eliminator match. But Sammy Vasquez turned it down. This man, Errol Spence, I mean, once again, just go through the list of fighters. Once again, forget about what you think about why these fighters, they turned down a fight with Errol Spence. Let's just look at the fact that Errol called these guys out. Errol called out Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, Sean Porter. He negotiated with Konstantin Panamarev. We just found out that Lamont Peterson turned down a fight. Sammy Vasquez turned down a fight. Kell Brook has not been too crazy about getting in the ring with Errol Spence. Man, that's the whole division. That is the whole welterweight division. No one wants to fight Errol Spence. Forget about why they said they didn't want to fight him. Just look at the fact that those 6 or 7 fighters that I just mentioned, they all have something in common, and that is none of them wanted any parts of Errol Spence. Now, according to the IBF, there is one fighter that's willing to step up to the challenge, and that is Leonard Bundu. So now they're negotiating. Now Leonard Bundu, he basically said he was interested in negotiating, to fight Errol Spence. So hopefully he doesn't pull out. Now, for those of you guys who don't remember Leonard Bundu, he actually fought against Keith Thurman. And some people believe that to a certain extent, he kind of exposed Keith Thurman. I mean, I don't really know if it was that much exposure, but let's just put it this way. Bundu definitely gave Keith Thurman arguably his most difficult fight. He gave him his toughest fight to date. Okay? Leonard Bundu, he's a switch hitter. He switches from righty to lefty. He has a very good defense. He's an awkward type of fighter. So, by way of contrast, it would really be interesting to see if Errol Spence could go in there and he can annihilate a fighter that Keith Thurman couldn't even come close to getting rid of. Well, I shouldn't say come close to, because actually Keith Thurman, he did knock down Bundu. But after he knocked down Bundu, it seems like Bundu, he adjusted. And for whatever reason, Keith Thurman never came close to really hurting him after that. And it became, like I said, a very difficult fight for Keith Thurman. Now, we already seen what Errol Spence did to Chris Algieri, in contrast to what Manny Pacquiao did to Chris Algieri. And once again, we know that Keith Thurman, he went 12 rounds with Bundu. So I'm telling you right now, if Errol Spence goes in there and he runs over Bundu the same way he ran over Chris Algieri, it would be very, very difficult. Errol Spence not deserving a shot at Keith Thurman if he goes in there and he annihilates the exact same opponent that Keith Thurman went 12 rounds with. So I'm telling you guys right now, man, the walls are closing in. Those Errol Spence walls are closing in on these welterweights. And eventually, these welterweights, they ain't going to have nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and no reason to justify not fighting Errol Spence. If Errol Spence ends up getting that shot at Vargas versus Brook winner, and if he ends up beating the winner of that fight, it's going to be very difficult for welterweights to make excuses why they don't want to fight Errol Spence next. And to even add on to that, you have Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez, who's still fighting at 154, or actually 155, which everyone is now calling the Canelo weight. Now that he's fighting at 155, guess what? Errol Spence, he said he'll go up to 155 and fight against Canelo Alvarez. So if Canelo Alvarez is willing to fight against Amir Khan, who isn't known for having a great chin, who isn't considered top 5, not even top 10 now, one of the best welterweights in the world. How do you justify fighting against one of the weakest welterweights in the division and not fighting the best welterweight in the division? The walls are closing in, guys. The walls are closing in. So basically, it looks like we might see Errol Spence versus Leonard Bundu next. And once again, the only good thing about that is we get to see how Errol Spence does with a former Keith Thurman opponent. Because if I'm not mistaken, I believe Keith Thurman, he actually criticized Chris Algieri as an opponent for Errol Spence. So how are you going to criticize Errol Spence's opponent if it's the same guy you face next, which would be Leonard Bundu? This welterweight division, guys, is really, really heating up. I mean, Errol Spence, he done really shook things up. I mean, to see names like Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, Sean Porter, Kell Brook, Sammy Vasquez, Lamont Peterson, and the list just goes on and on and on. To see fighters on that level show this type of respect for one fighter, it says a lot about Errol Spence. So we'll see, man. We'll see if Errol Spence gets one of these guys in the ring before he becomes the official mandatory for the Brook versus Vargas fight. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.